Gabriel Moretti wakes up every day at 6 sharp without the need for an alarm. The habit, shaped by years of discipline and control, dictates every detail of his routine. The sun has barely begun to touch the rooftops of Florence when he is already on his feet, walking through the glass corridors of his modern apartment, silent as a temple. Nothing is out of place. Every piece of furniture rests exactly where it should be. Every surface reflects the coldness of a man who does not allow improvisation to invade his life. Like, comment, and share. It helps the channel grow and motivates us to keep creating inspiring stories. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel and become part of our story. He walks across the main room, where a Swiss clock rests on the unlit fireplace. The hand marks the seconds with machine-like precision, and Gabriel adjusts his wrist almost instinctively, as if he too were part of that mechanism. On the glass wall, the Renaissance city in the distance looks like a painting, but to him, it is nothing more than a distant backdrop. His world is confined to that meticulously calculated space, where every step echoes in absolute silence. At the table, black coffee rests in a white porcelain cup. No sugar, no milk, no deviations. Beside it, the screen of a monitor displays stock charts, financial indexes, and ascending lines narrating the story of his career. Gabriel built a digital empire, created platforms that connect millions of people, and turned code into fortune. But while the numbers rise on his screens, his personal life remains stagnant, frozen in a time marked by a wound he never managed to close. Years earlier, when he still believed in human warmth, Gabriel was betrayed. The exact detail of that betrayal is invisible to outsiders, but the scars are clear. He does not speak of it, but the way he lives tells the story. Since that day, laughter vanished, and in its place grew an obsession with control. Friends drifted away, family ties broke, and the magnate began to live surrounded by glass and secrets. As he takes the first sip of coffee, Gabriel reviews his schedule. Every commitment is timed. Board meetings, international calls, strategic reports. No surprises, no gaps. This is how he keeps the world at bay. The corridors of the apartment, long and lit only by natural light, reflect the same principle. Flawless beauty, but cold, almost untouchable. Anyone who enters immediately understands they are in the presence of a man who tolerates no imperfections. He crosses the office, where hardback books rest on perfectly aligned shelves. No sign of recent reading, no paper left behind. On the desk, only a sleek computer and a golden pen, placed parallel to the edge. Here, every detail is calculated, and Gabriel, seated in his leather chair, seems like the conductor of a silent symphony in which only he dictates the rhythm. But behind the impeccable image lies the weight of solitude. He will not admit it aloud, but the absence of laughter echoes as much as the footsteps in the corridors. Dinner is always served for one. The wine glass never toasts with another. The servants come and go in silence, obeying without question, leaving no marks on the house or on their master's heart. Gabriel's life is a reflection of his pain, organized, silent, and impermeable to any attempt at human warmth. As the sun rises over Florence, the city fills with life. Tourists in the squares, the sound of church bells, the bustle of the markets. But inside his apartment, none of it enters. There is only the controlled ticking of the clock, the slide of a cup against its saucer, and the cold glow of screens that never rest. Gabriel Moretti, the man who commands empires at his fingertips, is also the man who turned his home into a vault. A vault with no key, no opening, guarding not only secrets, but also a heart that has long refused to feel. That morning, the usual silence was interrupted by a different sound. The discreet chime of the doorbell echoed through the glass corridors. Gabriel Moretti, seated before his computer, did not rise. He only glanced at the Swiss watch on his wrist and noted mentally that the visitor had arrived precisely on time. A servant opened the door and announced the arrival of the new candidate for the position of housekeeper. Gabriel did not hurry. He rose calmly, adjusted his tie in the flawless reflection of the glass wall, and walked toward the main hall, where the interview would take place. There, standing in the wide space dominated by modern furniture and minimalist lines, was Clara Rinaldi. At 34, she carried in her eyes a spark that contrasted with the coldness of the house. She wore simple but neat clothes and held a folder with some papers, though she seemed little concerned with impressing through resumes or recommendations. There was something about her that escaped formal molds. Perhaps it was the way she adjusted her hair naturally or the firm way she faced the man before her, unshaken by his calculated posture. Gabriel, accustomed to observing nuances, noticed her upright stance, steady breathing, but also the trace of irony in her faint smile. He sat in his armchair and, without preamble, began with direct questions. He asked about previous experience, references, work routine. Clara answered clearly, but did not confine herself to formality. She added small, witty remarks, sounding like casual comments, yet disarming the rigidity of the questions. "I'm prepared for the hardest job in the city," she said after a sequence of inquiries. The phrase, spoken with humor and firmness, caught Gabriel's attention. He raised his eyes, as if weighing every word, trying to determine whether it was boldness or simply confidence. Clara did not look away. There was a frankness in her that did not ask for permission. As the conversation went on, Clara revealed something not written in her resume. She was a single mother of a 6-year-old girl named Sophia. The admission could be seen as an obstacle for someone seeking stability in such a demanding job, yet Clara delivered it naturally, as one who embraces her reality without reservations. She said she knew how to balance responsibilities, that she had already faced far more complicated situations, and that nothing could take away her determination to keep moving forward. Gabriel listened in silence. His face changed little, but inwardly he recorded every detail. He had always been meticulous, almost relentless in his choices. He distrusted intentions, analyzed gestures, weighed each word as if they were numbers on a spreadsheet. But there was something about Clara that escaped the cold logic of his analyses. It wasn't the experience listed on paper, but the way she stood firm without losing her lightness, as if she could laugh even at the hardest demands. The interview continued with calculated questions and answers, alternating between seriousness and irony. Clara, noticing her employer's rigidity, made a point of breaking formality at small moments, dropping unexpected remarks. When Gabriel asked if she could handle a meticulous routine, Clara replied, "A meticulous routine I already have at home. My daughter insists the pasta must have exactly the same number of cheese balls every Sunday. If I survive that, I think I can survive Mr. Moretti." The comment drew a longer silence than usual from Gabriel, as if he struggled against the trace of a smile. He did not smile, not yet, but something in him shifted. When the interview ended, Clara stood calmly, thanked him for the opportunity, and concluded, "I may not be perfect, but I know how to work hard. And if you're looking for someone who will last more than a week in here, maybe I'm worth testing." The words lingered in the air like both a challenge and a promise. Gabriel watched her as she left the hall. Her firm steps echoed in the silent corridors, and for an instant, he realized that this woman was unlike the other candidates. There was something unpredictable about her, and perhaps that was exactly what would begin to break, little by little, the silence of that cold apartment. The next day after the interview, Clara was hired. Gabriel showed no enthusiasm and gave no explanation for his choice. He simply handed her cold, direct instructions, as if testing not only her ability, but also her endurance against the icy environment in which he lived. Clara, however, was not intimidated. She walked through the glass corridors, watching her reflection on the smooth walls, while thinking how much that place resembled a museum more than a home. Everything there was flawless, yet stripped of warmth. That morning, Gabriel decided to put into practice one of his old habits, the trust test. He believed that everyone, sooner or later, yielded to temptation, and for him, it was better to discover that early. before anyone had the chance to get too close. So, when he left his office for a virtual meeting in another room, he deliberately left a small pile of euro notes on the living room table, in plain sight. Beside them, an open book, as if forgotten in the middle of a reading. It was an invitation to error, a silent trap. Clara entered the room minutes later, carrying a cleaning bucket and a cloth. Her eyes immediately noticed the notes left there. Anyone, upon seeing them, might think of taking them, hiding them, or at least ignoring them. But Clara was not just anyone. She approached, studied the scene, and instead of simply looking away, she began to laugh to herself. She dropped the cloth on a chair, picked up the notes carefully, and, with the patience of someone folding clothes or arranging a child's toys, began to organize each bill. She didn't just align the money, she shaped the notes into a rounded form, with 2 curves at the top and a point below. When she was finished, what lay on the table was no longer a pile of euros, but a heart. Beside it, she pulled out a small piece of paper from her bag, wrote a few quick words with the pen she always carried, and left it right in the center of the table. The note read, "Since you left money lying around, I thought it best to keep it safe." Clara finished tidying up and went on with her work, cleaning the furniture as if nothing had happened. A short while later, Gabriel returned. His eyes, trained to catch details, immediately fell on the table. He expected to find missing notes, or at least evidence that someone had tampered with them. But what he found was different from any possibility he had imagined. There, in the middle of the immaculate table, was the heart made of euro notes, accompanied by the witty note. Gabriel stopped, silent. For long seconds he stared at the absurd sight. He could not believe someone had dared to play with something he had set as a test. His first impulse was irritation. Who was she to turn his money into a joke? But before anger could settle in, something unexpected happened. A short, almost choked laugh escaped his lips. It was a restrained laugh, but genuine, the first in years. He picked up the note, read it once, then again, and let the pen in his hand fall onto the table. That small act of boldness did not offend him. On the contrary, it had broken the monotony, disarmed his coldness, and drawn out of him a reaction he thought he had lost forever. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, still gazing at the heart of notes, and allowed another laugh, freer this time, to fill the silent room. When Clara returned to collect the cleaning bucket, she saw her employer holding the note between his fingers. She said nothing. She only cast a curious look and arched an eyebrow, as if silently asking whether he had approved of her little game. Gabriel did not reply. He simply tucked the paper into his jacket pocket and, with the smallest nod, signaled that she could continue with her work. But inside, something had already changed. For the first time in many years, the magnate of Florence had laughed for real. And that, though Clara did not yet know it, was the beginning of a transformation no money could ever buy. The days that followed began to take on small deviations that would have gone unnoticed to any other eye, but not to Gabriel Moretti, accustomed as he was to noticing every detail. On the first morning, when he sat at the table for coffee, he found on the marble surface a bowl of fresh lemons, gleaming under the light streaming through the glass wall. There was no apparent reason for them to be there. Gabriel disliked fruit on the table. He had not asked for them, but Clara had left them as one leaves a silent message, a burst of color in the middle of monotony. He looked at the lemons, sighed, and went on with his routine without comment. Yet the next day, the lemons were there again, arranged differently, as if forming a small work of domestic art. Clara, with her peculiar humor, began to introduce into the environment what she called human vitamins, whispering it to herself and laughing as she worked. One afternoon, Gabriel found on the living room table a notebook with a colorful cover. When he opened it, he realized it was a house rule book, but not of serious instructions. It was filled with humorous notes such as, Rule number 1, Never trust lemons that shine too much. They hide secrets. Or, rule number 3, if a pancake falls on the floor, it automatically becomes a work of abstract art. Gabriel flipped through the pages, and without realizing it, a discreet smile crept onto his lips. The contrast between their worlds became more evident one Sunday morning. Clara decided to prepare breakfast and made perfect golden pancakes, stacked neatly and drizzled with honey. Next to them, a small note read, "Life can still be sweet, even when the batter doesn't rise." Curious, Gabriel tried to imitate her. He cooked a single pancake in the flawless pan of his kitchen. The result was disastrous. The batter stuck, tore in the middle, and collapsed clumsily onto the stove. The smell of burning filled the room. Clara walked in and couldn't contain her laughter at the sight of the meticulous man facing his failed creation. Gabriel raised an eyebrow, almost offended, but soon let out a restrained laugh. For the first time, he allowed himself to laugh at his own mistakes. Small details kept accumulating. Clara enjoyed playing soft music on the old radio she had found tucked away in a cabinet. Italian songs from the 1970s began to echo through the corridors, replacing the absolute silence that had ruled the house. Sometimes she hummed quietly while dusting or tidying up the rooms. Gabriel, from his office, pretended not to notice, but his fingers tapped the rhythm discreetly on the desk. Her presence was not intrusive, yet it transformed the space. A glass of water with a slice of lemon left by his keyboard. A post-it with a funny drawing stuck to the fridge door. A bookmark deliberately left inside a book with the phrase, "Reading is living twice." Gabriel, who never tolerated interference, did not reject them. On the contrary, he began to anticipate them. There was also the morning when Clara, noticing the seriousness with which he adjusted his tie in the mirror, entered the room unannounced and naturally fixed the knot that was slightly crooked. Gabriel froze, surprised by the gesture. There were no words, only her light, sure touch correcting the detail before she stepped back as if nothing had happened. These seemingly insignificant gestures began to open space for something Gabriel would not admit, but could no longer control. Laughter returned, even if faint. Music filled the halls. The lemons, always present, became symbols of vitality in the rigidity of the house. Clara, without announcing it, was changing the rhythm of that cold home. And Gabriel, though silent, was beginning to join in this invisible game, discovering that between burnt pancakes and witty notes, there was more life than in any chart of success on his screen. As the weeks went by, the glass house, once marked by an almost sepulchral silence, began to come alive through discreet gestures, little inventions that wove invisible bonds. Clara, with her light touch, turned routine tasks into silent games that, little by little, drew Gabriel in, even if he would not admit it. The vacuum cleaner, for example, a modern and noisy model gliding across the marble corridors, was given a name by Clara: Cavalieri. Every time she turned it on, she would announce theatrically, "The knight is ready to defend the honor of the house." The phrase echoed, provoking curious looks from the staff and leaving on Gabriel's lips an almost imperceptible smile. Once, as he passed down the hallway and heard the machine buzzing, Gabriel muttered quietly, "Here comes Cavalieri." Clara, nearby, pretended not to hear, but kept the moment as a silent victory. Another day, while tidying the papers in the office, Clara cut out small tickets of paper and left them on Gabriel's desk. "Valid for one smile," they read in hurried handwriting. When he found the first one, he frowned. But throughout the week, more tickets appeared in strategic places, inside a book he rarely opened, in his desk drawer, even folded inside one of his report folders. Each time he discovered one, Gabriel felt a strange discomfort, as if being provoked. But along with that discomfort came the unavoidable reminder that someone was trying to unlock something he had kept under lock and key. The micro-gestures began to multiply. Clara, with the natural ease of someone adjusting a child's hair, stepped closer once again, while Gabriel struggled in front of the mirror with a tie that refused to sit straight. Without asking permission, she tightened the knot with precision, and stepped back. He stood still, surprised, but said nothing. For the first time in years, he felt the light touch of someone who wanted nothing in return, only to set a small detail in order. On certain nights, Gabriel allowed himself to sit before the piano that stood in a corner of the living room. The instrument was always tuned but rarely played. He pressed short notes without commitment, almost as if testing a memory. On one such evening, Clara, walking down the hallway, whistled the melody casually, as if it were a natural extension of the music. Gabriel at first stopped playing and cast a stern look. But soon his fingers returned to the keys, and this time he kept the rhythm while the whistle accompanied him. It was the first time that the piano and a human voice met in that house. These small encounters, always masked as coincidence, wove an invisible thread between them. Clara never imposed herself, but she left traces. Gabriel never admitted it, but he followed those traces in silence. He kept the paper tickets in a drawer, as if they were secret relics. He noticed that the vacuum cleaner, once nothing more than a machine, had become part of an inside joke. And when he found himself alone in the office, he would sometimes smile, remembering how Clara even turned the lemons on the table into metaphors for sunlight inside the house. It was a silent game, where no one openly said what was happening, but every micro-gesture opened a crack in the icy wall Gabriel had built. The man accustomed to numbers, contracts, and precise calculations was beginning to find himself entangled in details that didn't fit into charts. And Clara, unhurried, continued to weave that invisible thread, aware that true transformation was hidden not in grand declarations, but in the smallest of gestures. It was a clear afternoon in Florence when the routine of the glass house was startled by a new presence. Gabriel, as usual, was in his office, immersed in reports and screens, when a child's voice echoed through the corridors. A light, carefree voice that clashed with the habitual silence of the house. He lifted his eyes from the computer, incredulous, unsure if he had truly heard it. In the entrance hall, Clara appeared with a 6-year-old girl by her side. Sophia, her daughter, had brown hair that fell in disheveled waves and held a small stuffed rabbit, worn with time. Her wide eyes explored every detail of the house with childhood curiosity, as if the place were a magical palace. Clara, visibly uneasy, explained quietly to the housekeeper that she had been unable to find a neighbor to watch the girl that afternoon, and so had no choice but to bring her along. Gabriel descended the stairs slowly, each step measured. His gaze was stern and unreadable, as always, but there was also a trace of surprise. He stopped in front of the two, and before he could say anything, Sophia lifted her eyes and said with disarming naturalness, "Hello, Uncle Gabriel." The spontaneity of the greeting broke the ice in the room. Gabriel was not accustomed to being addressed that way. Mr. Moretti was the title that echoed through his life, the way everyone treated him, with respect and distance. But Uncle Gabriel sounded intimate, almost familiar. He remained silent for a few seconds, as if his mind struggled to process such a simple gesture. Without asking permission, Sophia wandered into the main living room and touched the glass surface of a table, delighted by the reflections it cast. Then she ran to the wide window and pointed at the gardens, exclaiming about things only a child could see. Shapes in the clouds, hidden colors in the flowers, shadows that looked like drawings. Clara followed anxiously, telling her to be careful, apologizing to Gabriel for the disturbance. But instead of scolding, he only watched. The risk was clear. For a man who lived surrounded by control, allowing the presence of a child meant giving up absolute order. A toy left behind could break the symmetry of the room. A loud laugh could disturb the cadence of his minutes. An accident could cause irreparable damage. Gabriel knew this. And yet, in silence, he did not ask her to leave. Curious, Sophia approached him. She stretched out her arm, seeking approval, and showed him the stuffed rabbit. "His name is Federico. He likes music. Do you have a piano?" Gabriel blinked slowly, surprised by the directness of the question. He wasn't used to being addressed like that, especially by a child. He only nodded and pointed to the instrument resting in the corner of the room. Sophia ran to it, pressing the keys in chaotic disorder, and the house, which for years had known only restrained sounds, exploded into a storm of notes. Clara apologized again, but Gabriel raised his hand, asking for silence, not out of irritation, but because he wanted to listen. At that moment, a question began to grow within him, silent and inevitable. Would he welcome this presence or reject it? Sophia knew nothing of the old wounds, the invisible rules that kept her mother's employer in his glass fortress. To her, Gabriel was not an untouchable man, but simply Uncle Gabriel, and that innocent title alone had already toppled one of his first barriers. As the girl laughed at the noise she made on the piano and Clara watched anxiously for her employer's reaction, Gabriel realized that life, in all its spontaneity, had entered his house without asking permission. The question was no longer whether he would allow it, but how he would respond to this small force that, in seconds, had turned silence into music. The afternoon moved calmly through the glass house when the inevitable happened. Sophia, enchanted by its grandeur, explored every corner as if wandering through a magical labyrinth. Her light steps crossed the main hall, where rare pieces and valuable objects rested like relics. Gabriel, seated on the sofa, observed from a distance, trying to maintain a neutral expression, though every gesture of the child stirred a quiet tension inside him. Clara followed her closely, but all it took was a single moment of distraction for the accident to unfold. On a low table near the wide glass window stood a crystal vase, an antique that reflected the light in delicate tones. Sophia, curious, leaned in to admire its glow. She touched it with the tip of her fingers, entranced by its shimmer. The vase wobbled. Clara noticed too late. A second later, the object slid and shattered against the floor, scattering shards in every direction. The sharp sound thundered through the room, shattering the silence like a storm. Clara gasped, covering her mouth in horror. She knew the value of that vase, not only in money but as a symbol of the perfection and order Gabriel maintained. She knelt quickly, apologizing, trying to gather the fragments with trembling hands. Sophia, meanwhile, stood frozen, her eyes filled with tears as she realized what she had done. Gabriel stood upright, motionless, his eyes fixed on the scene. Inside him, two forces collided. The instinct of rigidity, the habit of tolerating no mistakes, urged him to raise his voice, to scold the child, to punish the error. But another voice, quieter, had begun to stir in recent days. A voice that remembered the yellow lemons on the table, the heart made of euro notes, the paper tickets hidden in drawers, the small smiles that had returned. Trying to mend what she had broken, Sophia picked up some of the flowers that had been inside the shattered vase. She walked to a shelf and found a simple container, plain glass with no special value. With her small hands, she placed the flowers inside and arranged them as best she could. Then she looked up at Gabriel and said in a timid but steady voice, "Look, it's the vase that stood up again." The silence that followed was profound. Clara, still kneeling, lifted her eyes to her employer, bracing for his reaction. But something extraordinary happened. Instead of the cold anger everyone expected, Gabriel slowly approached. His gaze moved over the shards of crystal on the floor, then lingered on the simple vase with the flowers now restored. The girl's words echoed within him like a distant revelation. It's the vase that stood up again. He took a deep breath, and in an unexpected gesture he knelt down beside Sophia. There was no reprimand in his voice, only a calmness that surprised even himself. "You're right," he said, looking at the improvised flowers. "Sometimes what rises is stronger than what fell." Clara, moved, held back tears. Sophia smiled, relieved, as if forgiveness had been granted without her even asking. Gabriel, rising to his feet, paid no attention to the shards still scattered across the floor. What mattered was in front of him, the choice not to let the ice take control again. That broken vase was more than just an accident. It was a symbol. For years, Gabriel had lived in fear that any mistake could destroy the fragile balance of his life. But now, confronted with a child who had turned loss into creation, He realized it wasn't the vase itself that mattered, but the possibility of rebuilding. And in that instant, he made the choice that would change everything. To embrace rather than reject. Not just the girl, but also the gestures, the laughter, the imperfections that were bringing life back into the house. The morning after the vase accident, Gabriel's house seemed different. A soft light filtered through the glass windows, illuminating every corner as if the house itself were breathing anew. It wasn't just the Florentine sun filling the halls, but something deeper, invisible, vibrating in the air. Gabriel woke early as always, but this time it wasn't the clock that guided him, but a muffled laughter coming from the kitchen. Approaching, he found Clara in her apron, stirring pancake batter, while Sophia, wooden spoon in hand, helped mix it. The sweet aroma filled the rooms, contrasting sharply with the routine silence he had grown accustomed to. For a moment, Gabriel simply stood at the doorway, watching the scene unnoticed. He realized he didn't feel intruded upon, but a strange sense of belonging. On the table still sat the bowl of lemons Clara had left days before. The yellow gleaming fruit seemed to capture all the light in the room. Gabriel smiled subtly, noting how this simple detail had become a symbol. Sunlight inside the house. Suddenly, the corridors that had once been cold now reflected life. When Clara noticed him, she lifted her eyes and smiled spontaneously. Sophia ran to him, and without fear, took his hand to lead him to the table. Gabriel, still surprised by the naturalness of the gesture, allowed himself to follow. He sat and accepted the improvised meal offered to him. The pancake was far from perfect, but its taste was more valuable than any banquet he had ever experienced. Throughout the day, the micro-gestures multiplied. Gabriel passed through the living room and found a new note left by Clara, pinned to a shelf in elegant handwriting. Rule number 8, always leave room for a surprise. Reading it, he couldn't help but smile. He realized he had begun collecting each of these small papers as if they were secret treasures. Later, Sophia appeared with the vacuum cleaner nicknamed Cavaliere, parading it around the room like a toy horse. Gabriel, who would have scolded her before, this time simply watched, eventually finding himself laughing along. The sound of his own laughter echoed strangely and liberatingly, as if breaking another invisible glass barrier surrounding him. Seeing him laugh, Clara said nothing, but her eyes shone with a mix of surprise and tenderness. Gabriel, in turn, felt something growing inside him, a sense of reconnection he hadn't experienced in years. The ice around him began to thaw, replaced by an unexpected warmth, built not by grand gestures, but by simple details. In the afternoon, passing by the piano, Gabriel let his fingers wander across the keys, releasing soft notes. There was no planned music, only a whistle that turned into melody. Clara and Sophia, sitting nearby, listened in silence, and for the first time, he didn't feel exposed. He felt accompanied. Before nightfall, Gabriel walked to his office. In the drawer, he found the notes Clara had scattered around the house. Hearts, jokes, invented rules. He organized them into a small box, as if recognizing a treasure. Closing the lid, he placed his hand on it, aware that something within him had changed. The house, once cold, had become a home. Not because of architecture, crystal pieces, or rare artworks, but because of the sound of laughter now echoing through the halls, the smell of simple food, the flowers restored in a worthless vase, the bowl of lemons radiating color across the table. Gabriel realized it wasn't just his house that had been transformed, but his own heart. And as he lay down that night, he heard Sophia's distant laughter and Clara's soft humming. He closed his eyes with a serene smile, understanding that life had returned to that place, irreversibly. Night fell over Florence, tinting the rooftops with shades of orange and gold. Inside the glass house, the soft lamplight created a cozy atmosphere, unlike anything Gabriel Moretti had experienced there before. The house, which for years had remained cold and silent, was now breathing. The echo of Sophia's laughter filled the corridors, and the soft music Clara played on the radio seemed to tell a story of transformation, hope, and new beginnings. Gabriel watched the scene from the top of the stairs, arms crossed, still maintaining the rigid posture life had taught him. But his eyes, attentive, could not ignore the joy spreading through the space. Every small detail, the bowl of lemons on the table, the scattered paper tickets, the flowers in simple vases, told the story of how this home, and he himself, had changed. And in that moment, he understood that some things truly cannot be bought. They must be cultivated with care, patience, and affection. Clara approached him, holding Sophia's hand. The girl looked at Gabriel with her unpretentious, confident way and said, "Shall we have dinner, Uncle Gabriel?" He felt the weight of that simple sentence. It was more than an invitation to share a meal. It was an invitation to connect, to accept that life could be more than order and rules. Gabriel hesitated for a moment, not out of doubt, but as a subtle pause after years of isolation and uncertainty about what it meant to allow himself to feel again. Then he took a deep breath, lowered his shoulders, and smiled. "Yes," he said finally, his voice calm and steady. "Let's have dinner." Clara smiled, surprised and relieved, and Sophia leapt for joy, rushing to set the table with cutlery and plates. Gabriel followed behind, still conscious of each step, but noticing the difference in the house. There was now warmth, not from the sun, but from the people around him, from relationships beginning to bloom, from gestures that could not be planned but held the power to transform lives. During dinner, small conversations arose naturally. Gabriel spoke more than he had in months, cautiously, and laughed when Sophia recounted her daily adventures with the innocent spontaneity of a child. Clara observed the man who had seemed untouchable, noticing subtle changes, the sparkle in his eyes, the relaxed shoulders, the lightness finally emerging in his voice. The burned pancakes of previous days, the hidden notes, the broken and restored vase, all had transformed into memories, bridges built between them. Gabriel was no longer just the magnate who controlled every second of his life. He was someone capable of feeling, laughing, accepting imperfection, surrendering to the unpredictable. The glass house was no longer merely an architectural marvel, but a home full of life, noise, color, and laughter. As night advanced, Gabriel looked around the table and felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Belonging. A deep, silent, constant warmth that filled every void in his house and in his heart. Sophia rested her head on his shoulder. Clara held his hand, and in that simple gesture, the loneliness that had accompanied him for years disappeared. He finally understood that happiness was not in controlling every detail or accumulating wealth, but in cultivating relationships, accepting vulnerability, and allowing oneself to feel. Later, walking through the illuminated corridors, he noticed the lemons, the notes, the piano, the small signs of life Clara and Sophia had brought. A calm smile formed on his face, and he whispered to himself, "Some things cannot be bought. They must be cultivated." And for the first time in many years, Gabriel Moretti felt that his life, his home, and his heart were finally complete. The house, once silent and cold, had become a home. And in that moment, with Clara and Sophia by his side, he knew the future held only possibilities of joy, love, and simple moments that would be eternally remembered in smiles and memories. Dinner ended, but the feeling of renewal remained. The house breathed, the improvised family was united, and life went on, lighter, fuller, and infinitely more human than it had ever been. Gabriel and Clara realized they were already part of each other, and from that day forward, they would walk together until the end. And so ends another heartwarming story here at Enchanting Stories. If you felt every laugh, every gesture, and every emotion alongside Gabriel, Clara, and Sophia, then you know that these small gestures can truly change lives. And that's exactly what we aim to share with you every day. Now, how about becoming part of our growing community? Subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and come laugh, dream, and feel with us. Like the video, share it with a friend who needs a smile today, and leave a comment telling us which moment of the story made your heart beat the fastest. Every like and every comment helps us keep bringing more enchanting stories straight to you. And while you do that, we want to know, which city are you watching from? Write it in the comments, because we love feeling the energy of all of you around the world, each bringing a piece of your life to this family that grows every day. So don't forget, stories have the power to transform, and you can be part of that transformation with us. Stay tuned, because we still have plenty of magic to share, laughter to spread, and hearts to touch. See you in the next video, full of wonder and emotion.